You'll know when we're live. Well, good afternoon and good morning or good evening, depending on where you're watching. This is Marion Spears Carr, and I am so excited to be bringing another episode of Healthcare Thought Leadership with an amazing colleague and individual. We're glad that you're joining us on this Friday. I want to introduce my colleague. I got to meet her through Dory Clark's Rexer program. That's called the Recognized Expert program. And one of the things I love about that network is it really fits with what I've said this show's about, sharing my network with my network and beyond. And today, our guest is Dr. Jennifer Nash. She has a PhD and MBA. She's the author of a book called Be Human, Lead Human, which we're going to talk about. She's a consultant and coach to Fortune 50 companies in leadership and just an incredible person. And I'm so glad and so pleased to have you on the show, Jennifer. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Marion. It's so nice to be here today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Nash. I am based in Austin, Texas, and I work with leaders who want to be better leaders and make the world a better place.
It's so exciting, and I love that you're in Austin. You and I were on talking
Yeah.
offline, and then in the pre-show that Texas is where I do a ton of the work that I do. And for those of you who are watching who've never met me, I do executive recruiting and lead an executive search company. It's practice in the healthcare and life sciences space. So today we're really going to be talking to healthcare leaders, but we're going to be talking about leadership in general. So I think anyone watching the show will gain some value from our conversation. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is in my world, Jennifer, you and I talked about this before. And by the way, if you're
Mhm.
watching live, please post in the comments where you're watching. And if you have questions for Dr. Nash, please put them in the comments as well, and we'll get to those. One of the things that you and I talked about is that in healthcare leadership, there's in life sciences and biotech and pharmacy, there's this structure, right? There's data that's coming at everyone. There's all these different processes that people are trying to follow. There's rules, there's regulatory environment challenges. There's all these different things. And now combine that with what we learned during the COVID era, the
Mhm.
COVID pandemic about all these challenges. And I think leadership got exposed. But one of the things that struck me when I started learning about your work and the title of your book, Be Human, Lead Human, is this connection that you want to make with leaders, with the humanity and
Mhm.
connecting with people. And I love that that's where your point of reference. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you got into that side of leadership coaching and leadership development. Tell us a little bit about that, and let's just jump right in.
Sure. So, it's interesting because, when I set foot in the workplace a really long time ago, really struggled to figure out how I fit. I really struggled to understand like the culture of work, why people were acting the way they were, why they use sports language to just, to explain all these different things. And it never really seemed to make sense to me. And I've always been someone who loved to observe other people and observe behavior and try to understand what is it about that behavior? Where is that coming from? What's driving them? And so as I, went through my career, I had a lot of opportunity to study all of these different individuals in this, big ecosystem of the
Mhm.
business world. And, it became very clear to me that like when you think about an iceberg and you think about the behaviors that people are exhibiting, the behaviors are the part of the iceberg that's above the waterline, right? Those are the
Yeah.
things you can see. But what's not seen, what's not visible is what's below the waterline. And those are the thinking and beliefs and actions that people have that they carry with them that were shaped from, from our early years, in our formative families. And so digging into, what makes people tick and helping me understand them better gave me context to interpret the behaviors that I was seeing, and it helped me then, um, you know, role model what I wanted to display for others. And hopefully, people around me were picking up on that. So I think from a very early age, it was imprinted upon me, like, if I can understand other people a little bit better, then I'm gonna have some more compassion for them. I will have more empathy for them. And I think, when you look at how that translates into the workplace, you may be looking at the person in front of you as the nurse. You may be looking at the person in front of you as, their title in the organization or in the company or in the institution they're working. But when you put that human element around that lens and you look at them in the context of, oh, well, maybe this is a parent who has just lost their child, or maybe this is someone who is so stressed out because they are taking care of elderly parents and they've got two kids they're trying to homeschool, that they are burned out and they're tired, right? And so when you think about someone from that perspective, you think about the whole human being that they are, not just the totality of output that they can provide for your organization or for your company. It gives you a different way to think about them, and it gives you a different way to interact with them, and it gives you different points of contact that you can establish with them. Those are a lot of the things that I talk about in my book.
Yeah, and I want to show the audience your book, and later in the show, you're going to be able to share a chance for them to be able to purchase the book. But well, let's add this. Here's the book. Um, if let me take a couple of these banners off. I get too fancy sometimes, Jennifer, with all my, you you know, hint hint. If Dory were watching, she would know that I'm just copying her. So this is the book, How to Connect People and Performance, Be Human, Lead Human. And
Mhm,
we've got some people checking in. Let's see. Paul Barkley's checking in
mhm.
he's a hospital executive in Milledgeville, Georgia.
Great.
Paul, congratulations, by the way. He just became a fellow in the American College of Healthcare
Oh,
Executives. So
wonderful.
glad to have
Congratulations.
him. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what this connection and to this. You just explained kind of seeing it from that lens, and that,
Mhm,
tell me a little bit. Tell me one of the things I loved about what I learned about the book is that you are quite a storyteller, and you're telling the stories of a lot of different people. When you started doing the research for this book,
yeah.
what struck you about the stories and and what you were learning? What
Mhm.
was there surprises? Was there something that was like, wait a minute, that I got to have that in the book?
Mhm. There were, like, so let me give you an example. There's a story that I tell in the book, and the leader is a leader of um, an a healthcare insurance company. And
Okay.
so this leader took over from the prior leader, and she decided that she wanted to just have an open door policy and listen to the people that she was going to be leading. So she wanted to meet with everyone in the company and have them tell her three things. One thing
Oh
was,
wow.
what's working well?
Yeah.
The second question was, what's not working well? And the third question was, what's one thing that you think I should change? And so ultimately, she met with almost 90 or 95% of the people in the company once
Wow.
they realized that it was safe to go in and talk to her, right? That it wasn't going to be, oh, you're being let go and,
Mhm.
there's the door. It was, I truly and authentically want to have a conversation with you. And I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to learn from you. You are the people on the front line doing the work. And it's my job to listen to you and make sure that you feel heard and you feel understood. And, during our conversation, she says, people just want to feel seen. They want to be seen for who they are as human beings, not just that title or the output that they're delivering for the work. So as I started the research for this in 2014 during my doctoral work, and I continued that research through 2020. So it took me quite a long time to gather,
Mhm.
the stories. But as I was gathering all of that data and compiling that and doing the factor analyses and all of the things that you do to statistically have reliable studies and qualitative data interviewing as well, it became very clear to me that from the leaders that I had spoken with, there were several things that the outstanding leaders did,
Mhm.
that the I would say the average leaders didn't do. And those particular things, those factors became the humans framework that I discuss in my book.
That I love that. I love the fact that you saw that was where the challenge sometimes is, and that was
Mhm.
one of the key separators from the top leaders.
Yeah.
In my work, I've been doing executive search work for 30, I hate to admit, 30 plus years. I
Yeah.
joke with everyone that when I started in this industry, I had a full head of hair. So obviously, you can see what happened since 1991. Uh, but I'm sure that's more genetics than the stress of the industry. But
Yeah.
one of the things that was always interesting to me is learning about that, what separated the great leaders from
Mhm.
the average. And one of the things that you and I again talked about prior to coming on the air was about the fact that during the pandemic, the strength of leadership or the weaknesses thereof were
Yes.
really exposed during the pandemic.
Yes,
Uh,
100%.
yeah, right. And so
Yeah.
you were finishing your book right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm really
Yeah.
curious about how the work that you've done is being received in this
Mhm.
post-pandemic world.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
your thoughts about, are leaders saying, "Wait a minute, we do need to be thinking about the human factor side of this place"? What's been the reception of your
Mhm.
work after the
Mhm.
pandemic? I think that would be really interesting to talk about.
Sure. I think it's very revealing, right? So COVID essentially pulled back the curtain and said, "Hey, leaders, you are leading people." Now, we know that leaders lead people, but I always want to invite people to think about that for a second.
Mhm.
Are leaders really leading people? Or are they leading profits? Are they leading process? Are they leading procedure, like we talked about earlier
Yeah.
in the LinkedIn Live, right? What are they really leading? And COVID a choice. COVID said, you're now working remotely. You have to figure out how to lead. And the problem was that the leaders didn't have, most of them didn't have tools in their toolkit to do that. And so they struggled with that and they rushed to reduce uncertainty by micromanaging, right? They did everything but lead the people in front of them when the people in front of them were saying, I just need you to see me. I need you to see that I'm struggling with, the kids running around the room and I'm trying to homeschool and I have all these different challenges that are coming up and I just need flexibility. I need that understanding so I can do the work in the best way possible. I know for your audience, many of them were right on the front line, dealing with patients that were struggling with COVID. And so making sure that that human element is first and foremost at the forefront of what is happening was extremely critical to those
Mhm.
patients who were in a room and maybe on their last breaths with no one surrounding them except maybe one of the nurses or physician assistants supporting them because their family couldn't be there. So I think one of the benefits of COVID was that um, it forced the human element finally back to the forefront. And when you think about leadership and you think about the number of years that we've been practicing leadership, which is about, 80, 90 years of research for
Mhm.
leadership, we really haven't shifted the way that we lead. And I think that it's time to shift to a more humane approach that allows people to be seen and heard and understood and feel appreciated and feel that they matter for the work that they do. And not just for the work that they do, but for the whole human beings that they are. I really believe that organizations now should be places where people come to work as well as grow, right? They need to evolve. People want to evolve. We all want to learn and grow.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, when we're past, that lower hierarchy on Maslow's pyramid of, the physiological needs, the physiological safety needs, up at the top of that pyramid, we have the self-actualization needs. And those are where, when you think about the humans framework that I have in the book, those needs lie on different areas of that pyramid. But at the end of the day, what's going to matter is, you know, did I make a difference in this world? Did I add value? Did I make someone else's day better? And a lot of the clients that I have, often I will ask them to write their obituary for me as part of their homework from their first session.
What a great exercise. What a terrifying but great exercise. Tell me
Yes.
about that. That's fantastic. I'd love to hear more. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear more about that.
It's
Wow.
interesting because when you ask someone to think about, look, pretend that you're 95 years old, right? And you're sitting in your rocking chair on the porch and you are, just contemplating life and watching the traffic go by. And if you had to write your obituary in this moment, what would you be saying? What would you want people to be saying about you? What would you want to know that your life, what is the purpose that you had in your life? Did you realize that purpose? And then the whole point of that exercise is for people when we debrief it after, is
Mhm.
for them to say, look, if you're not where you want to be, in with what people are going to say about you in that obituary, what do you need to do between now and then to get you to that point? And are those the things that are going to matter to you? Are those the things that are going to leave a legacy for you? For me, in that way, this book is the start of my legacy. This is the start for me to help share with the world the things that I have known and learned, often through a lot of bumps and scrapes, throughout my
Yep.
career, to make it easier for someone else so that they don't have to go through that. And I think when we offer the opportunity to people to grow and evolve in a way that works best for them, um, the results come, the performance comes. There's a book by I think it's Jim Collins called Good to Great,
Yep.
where he describes these organizations that have some of these different practices that rather focus on people other rather than performance.
Mhm.
And I think that is evidence that this is possible, right? If you look at Ford Motor Company and the way that Alan Mulally was able to take the company from a $17 billion loss to over an 1,800% increase in stock price by the time he retired. um, it's incredible what can happen when you do put people first and you prioritize that human element of business.
I love that, and I love the Ford story. That and one that I'm very familiar with, and
Mhm.
have studied in the leadership work that I do. For those of you who are watching this, please let us know in the comments if you're watching live or if you watch the replay, which is the majority of the people that watch these shows watch the replay. You're watching Healthcare Thought Leadership with Marion Spears Carr. That's me. I'm a managing director of healthcare and life sciences practice for a company called Comar Partners. I've been in the executive search space
Mhm.
for a very, very long time. I'm fascinated with thought leaders in the leadership space and the human learning space and the development space. And Dr. Nash has been so kind to join me on the show today. Jennifer, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that learning in this context, what you're teaching, this
Mhm.
whole piece comes from different places with the generations. And, our workforce
Mhm.
is really, and I told you I was going to ask you a question that's probably a little bit of a curveball, but please forgive me. Uh, Forgive me for that, but it's where my brain's going. So we already talked about that too.
Okay.
We have a lot of the people that follow me on LinkedIn, a lot of the people that I work with are young leaders.
Yes.
Their perspective on learning, their perspective on developing is from a leadership skill set comes from a different point of reference than say my generation or the generations above us. What are some of the things that let's just start with the young leaders.
Mhm.
What are some things that they can do to learn and embody some of the things that you just talked about in their leadership style and their leadership approach? Uh,
Mhm.
Share that if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that question, Marion. And I think we have such an opportunity to reshape how we practice leadership and how we think about leadership. And this younger generation of leaders coming up is the perfect place and opportunity to do that. I think one of the ways that I think there's three ways. I think the first is for those leaders to pick up a copy of my book. The second is to take an inventory of where they land on their human leadership paradigm, right?
Mhm.
So I have an index that's available on my website. It's complimentary. And they can go out there and assess themselves and see where they fall on these competencies for this new leadership paradigm, which I call human leadership. And that can be a starting point to inform their journey on how they want to evolve and become human leaders, in their thinking and in their practice. The book goes into, an action plan that they can develop that's completely customized to them on what they need to do, and then also how they can take steps to implement that. So those are 3 things I would suggest to start with. I think it's really important when you think about leadership that you think about leading yourself first. That's the one suggestion that I would have for leaders who are just starting out. Oftentimes leaders are asked to set strategy for the organization.
Mhm.
But how often do leaders set strategy for themselves?
Yeah, yeah, I think that leadership creating a leadership commitment to ourselves, absolutely, I think is critically important, and no matter where we are in our career. By the way,
Mhm.
we will put in the chat the link to your website is drjennifernash.com. I have the link up there for the book itself, and they can find the link to the assessment on your page, I believe. And
Yes, it's on our
I
website.
love that. I love that you're sharing that. And by the way, if you watch the replay or you watch this, please connect with Dr. Nash on LinkedIn as
Mhm.
well, or connect with me, and we'll get you that information about that. So I love that, starting with yourself, leading yourself. So
Mhm.
now a lot of people that's in my world are senior executives. That's who I place. I'm
Mhm.
in the C-suite. I'm in the boardroom. That's the work that I do. So now talk to that
Mhm.
other generation. Obviously, I love those 3 things that you said with them. But what's one big takeaway for the senior leader who may have come up through the ranks of
Mhm.
process,
Yes.
get to the bottom line, you know, point A to point C, skipping B, and what are
Mhm.
some things that new, young, old, maybe that's not a wrong word. Somebody's going to get offended if I say old leaders, but those of us with bald heads and gray beards, how's that? Or gray hair. What's
Mhm.
something that we need to keep in mind about our leadership style and what we need to do in relation to the work that you do? Sorry, that's
Mhm.
a long question to a really short question. It took me a minute to get there. Took me a good.
Yeah, that's okay, Marion. I think the question you're asking is, what is one thing that I would offer these more senior leaders in organizations to be thinking about, as we're going forward, and how might they integrate human leadership into their practice of leadership? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
that's the question.
yeah,
Absolutely. That's
yeah.
absolutely the question.
It's so interesting to me because, as infants, we learn by mimicking, right? We learn how to behave by mimicking others.
Mhm.
And there's no difference between that and what happens in the workplace. So the senior leaders in organizations have an immense opportunity to shape and guide and coach and facilitate the newer leaders in the organization to develop themselves as leaders, right? To develop
Mhm.
themselves and lead themselves first so that they can lead others and lead results effectively. I think when the senior leaders sit back, they can reflect for maybe a moment and say, "Hey, is my leadership working the way that I want?" Right? And what are the key performance indicators that tell me that? How many, what does attrition look like in my organization? Am I having trouble finding talent or attracting talent? Am I challenged with this whole return to work thing and wanting people in the office or allowing them to work from home and giving them that agency and autonomy? You know, is this a power struggle between where work is going to get done and where work works best for the people that are doing it? Um, I think taking a moment to just reflect on how is the leadership working for me? And if you're not sure, go ask somebody, right? Ask someone that's around you. Hey,
Mhm.
how do you think I'm doing as a leader? What's one thing that I could do that maybe would make your day go a little bit easier, or make your life around here be a little bit uh, make it easier for you to get the work done that you need to do. I think, in my practice, I often have clients go through a process where they seek feedback from the stakeholders around them.
Mhm.
Because as people are notoriously poor at self-evaluation and how they are doing. And so when you seek the feedback from the people around them, and I often include the spouse or life partner in those
Mhm.
in those stakeholders, You tend to get a very different picture most times of the performance and how it's being perceived from the leader as opposed to the stakeholders. And I think that's a very helpful way to understand, are you leading in the way that you want to be leading? Is it
Mhm.
having the desired outcome that you were searching for? And the Human Leader Index that I mentioned earlier has a stakeholder component to it. So people can go out and take it for themselves, give them the self-assessment, and then they can ask people in their lives to take it for them. And then they can compare those two results and they get a personalized report that offers them that ability to take a look at that.
Yeah, I can't wait to take it. I'm really interested. I'm interested in those type of assessments, and we will put the link. I was trying to do it while we were talking. I will put the link in the chat after the show.
Mhm.
Um, I one of the areas that I focus on in my leadership development work is around gratitude and using it as a framework to get positive behaviors to be repeated. So there's
Mhm.
neuroscience behind it,
Mhm.
and it's called the authentic gratitude communication framework. And one of the things you talked about in your description was being authentic.
Mhm.
And I love that part of your work. One of the things you just said a minute ago, though, really struck me is leaders needing to provide and trust, like the
Mhm.
ability to take that kind of feedback, like you were talking about, from
Mhm.
our significant other, from our team.
Mhm.
We have to trust the process. We have to trust the situation. We have to be, and let's face it, a lot of leaders are sometimes can be insecure or struggle with that. What when you go into a client and you start talking about that process, what's some of the things you do to try to help build that trust so that they can say, okay, yeah, I'll expose myself to that approach, because not everybody's open to that in my mind, from what I can see.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts?
Mhm. Yeah, you're spot on. It's a very difficult thing to ask for feedback from others, and one of the key things that that requires is vulnerability. And I think that so often there is a perception that when someone is vulnerable, that that indicates weakness.
Hmm.
Just as often when, someone is too kind in the organization or someone is kind, people interpret that often as being weak.
Yep.
And I would offer that in this situation, when you're thinking about how do you build trust in an organization, how do you lead in a way that inspires others to follow you, and it also inspires others to perform at their best, um, you have to start with that central piece of being vulnerable, being courageous, and putting yourself out there in a way that reveals that, you know what, you're human too. And I think so often leaders feel like they have to be heroes. They have to save the day. They have to have all
Hmm.
the answers. They have to make all the decisions. And when you're leading with a human leadership paradigm, that is not the case. You're a coach, you're facilitating and you're guiding people and you're creating that environment, that culture of of flourishing so that people can perform at their best and they feel safe.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's so important. And I think it's very difficult for people. I told you before we got started, Jennifer, that this was going to
mm,
fly by. We're almost
yes.
out of time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're almost out of time. Jennifer, tell them about your book and how I think you're going to offer to the group if they're watching either now or in the
Mhm.
replay. Uh, tell, talk about what you were sharing, and I'm gonna post the book. I'll put the book back up on the screen for us.
Yeah, so, I think if there's anything that I'd like, people to take away from this conversation is
Yeah.
that, the opportunity is before us to rethink and reshape how we practice leadership today.
Hmm.
And the element that has been missing for so long in leadership is that human element. And that when we put the human element to the forefront, results follow, performance follows. And the book is an invitation to leaders and anyone actually who wants to be at their best as a human being to be intentional about what that strategy looks like for them, and then have an actionable roadmap that they develop to get to that point.
What a great way to wrap tie bow on everything. Jennifer, I am so pleased with our conversation. I was so pleased. I knew you were a little. Everybody that comes on my show, even people that have done a lot of these, I think I terrify them just a little bit because I don't give them the questions beforehand. But
Right. I kept asking, like, "Aren't you gonna give me questions so I can be prepared?"
no, that's not the model. But I love what you shared, and I hope people will watch the replay or got to watch it live. I know that we did have quite a few people watching live.
Mhm.
Jennifer, thank you so much for spending time with us. If you want to connect with Dr. Nash, please find her on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
In the chat after we go off the air, I'll post up the links to her webpage, to the book. Please reach out, go to Amazon, pick up your copy.
Oh, and we
Jennifer,
needed to mention that
yeah,
it's discounted today for the LinkedIn Live attendees.
exactly.
Mhm,
Today, if you're watching today, it is discounted. So
mhm.
go to Amazon and grab that book, and I'll put that link in the comments as well. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us, and have an amazing weekend. For those of you who are watching this show for the first time, this is Marion Spears Carr. This is Healthcare Thought Leadership. It's my somewhat weekly LinkedIn live show most every Friday, unless I'm traveling. Um, and It's where I share these amazing thought leaders that are in my network, with my network, and beyond my network. So if you'd like to be on the show, you'd like to know more about what we do, please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'll close with that. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.